Right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to our Native Strong Weekly Town Hall on the COVID-19 pandemic and the response to this date. We thank you all for joining us again. For those who have kind of, repeat customers, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, thank you for coming. Hopefully you brought some good questions. We enjoy having questions throughout the session here. We'll get to those at the end in our Q&A. If you are joining via Zoom, there's a little chat bubble at the bottom. You can drop a question in there. If you're joining via Facebook Live, you can drop in a comment as well. Before we get into it, I just wanted to mention next week, GLIC has a few events coming up. I believe on Tuesday, we have an event at our Native Wellness Garden. Check our Facebook for details on that. And then we also have a Mental Health Matters awareness event on Thursday, a drive-through walk-up event. Also, you can check our Facebook, facebook.com/GLIIHC, and just check the Facebook for information on that. So with that, I'm going to pass it along. Regretfully, our good friend Mark is not here today. He had a prior engagement. I believe he's coaching some sort of team. So hopefully they're doing well. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our featured speaker, who's been here now, 61, going on 62 weeks. Thank you again for joining us, Dr. Ignace, and thank you all for joining us again here today.
Thanks, Jeremiah, and welcome back to another week. Got some quick updates and just letting maybe a few announcements as well. So last week we talked a little bit about hesitancy and maybe why folks are not quite yet at that moment of getting the vaccine. We also talked about the CDC and their kind of guidance, decision, direction on masks, and how a lot of mask requirements are now kind of being punted down to the lower ends of either employers, businesses, local health departments, regional areas, mayors. It's now following upon them to make those harder decisions as to whether to mandate or continue those mandates of mask wearing or not. So I know people are wondering what about vaccine infections that occur after vaccine? How good are they? How effective are they? And I thought I'd bring this up because the CDC recently came out with a published report describing what's commonly known as breakthrough infections. Breakthrough infections are essentially individuals who get COVID after being fully vaccinated. And being fully vaccinated, essentially by definition, is 2 weeks after your second shot. So CDC comes out with this published paper. The time frame is January 1 to April 30th. And so they looked at a total of a little over 10,000 infections were documented at 14 days or more after the final dose, whether that be Pfizer, Moderna, Johnson & Johnson. And of these cases, almost 4,500 or 63% occurred in females, and the median patient age was 58. Now, among the total number of breakthrough infections, 27% were completely asymptomatic. And that's a really high number. 7% actually ended up being hospitalized with severe disease, and 1% died from reasons related to COVID. So the reason why I bring this up, because I thought is interesting, is this really falls in line with really the rationale and decision making why the CDC decided to lift mask requirements in certain areas. Because what we're really dealing with as a result of being vaccinated is that being fully vaccinated, your risk of infection is roughly 0.01%. 0.01%. Your chance of developing COVID and having severe disease and hospitalized, 0.0007%. And getting COVID, being hospitalized, and having a poor outcome of fatality, 0.0001% chance. So the bottom line is getting vaccinated, your chances of getting infected are, it's not zero, but it is really, really low. And it's even lower to actually having severe disease, and even lower to having a bad outcome or an individual passing away. Now, I'm a believer in the vaccine. I'm an advocate for the vaccine. I think probably most people who watch this are individuals who've gotten vaccine. Even if you haven't, you may know people who have not, and they may benefit from what you're getting from this. And so the other question is, well, what about vaccines and their effectiveness against the variants? We know they're good against the original virus. Are they good against the variants? And the question is, and I brought this up, and I'll bring it up again later on in the session, but the answer is yes. And of these individuals who've gotten ill with COVID, they looked at the genetic sequencing of 5% of all the infections, and what they found was, of all of the 5% that they sampled, 64% of the causes came from the variant of B117. Now, if you look at all of the infections, 64% of the sample that they took, again, that is a very, very small number to be concerned about whether or not the vaccines are effective against a variant. So I thought I'd bring this up because I thought it was important to the discussion that we have. And again, you may know individuals who maybe are reluctant, maybe they don't believe the effectiveness against not only the original virus, but also against the variants, and that's why maybe their hesitancy. But this paper highlights the notion that not only are they effective, but the breakthrough infections and their risk of hospitalization or fatal outcomes are so remarkably small. It really underscores the vital protection that the vaccines offer. Now, we've seen this table before. I really don't have any new highlights other than to emphasize that both Pfizer and Moderna are showing more and more concrete evidence to suggest that they are, in fact, effective against the variants. Even some early data is starting to come out showing that the vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, are effective against the B1617, the Indian variant that is now occurring. So these are all good news, and certainly shouldn't be a reluctance based on variants whether or not you should get the vaccine, because it definitely shows that it is efficient and protective. No, I keep updating this because I find it important, and at least this week kind of surprising. So here in Wisconsin, we're talking about variants. We're talking about the the number of cases that are starting to show, what genotypes that are starting to show. So Wisconsin takes, samples of positive tests, and they look at the genetic sequence to determine what type of virus we're talking about are infecting people here in Wisconsin. So we see that of all the regions in Wisconsin, all of the regions, the predominance of the alternative to the original is the B117 variant. Now, what I find interesting is all of these new infections that are starting to pop up are starting to lean more towards the variant. So for the last month, as I've been following this, as you look at this table below, you see on the right lower hand corner, what I circled is about 75.3%. That is still of the original wild type virus, coronavirus. Now, that's decreasing. What's increasing is the number of variants, and the predominance of that variant is the B117. And as you look through each region, if you look at each region, closer to the top, you see the north central line, where nearly 50% of all infections, or at least the genetic sequence of new infections there, are starting to show up as predominantly the B117. Now, nowhere else in the state shows such a deviation and such a high prominence of this type of virus infection. So that's what we know is occurring. And I think what's important to realize, and I'll keep reemphasizing this, that the vaccine Pfizer, Moderna are showing to be effective against the B117. And so that's why I bring this article back. This was one of the articles, one of the predominant articles that drove the CDC to really look at lifting the mandates on masks. So this was published May 5th out of the New England Journal of Medicine, looking at the effectiveness of the BNT 162b2 vaccine from Pfizer, and looking at its effectiveness. We already know it's effective against the original virus, the wild type virus. But when we look at the variants of the UK and South African B1351, we see that Pfizer is 90% effective against that variant and 75% against the South African. Now that's really remarkable because this kind of goes back to the previous CDC report of not only is it effective and what do we see in terms of breakthrough. Well, we're going to have breakthrough infections. It always happens, whether it's this type of vaccine, whether it is the flu vaccine. We've heard of people who've gotten the vaccine and end up getting the flu. Well, that would be defined as a breakthrough infection with the flu vaccine. Very much so, as we see here. But the chances of that happening are really, really low. And really looking at this paper, we see that it's effective without a doubt against the variants. But again, if you're going to get a variant infection with COVID, having had a vaccine, your chances of becoming severely ill also go dramatically down as well. So I wanted to bring this up and emphasize that as time is going by, there are becoming more and more evidence and papers that are being published to show its effectiveness also against the variants as well. So just to give a quick update as to what's going on in the world. So we know about India. I talked about India, that they were heading into a very difficult time. They have plateaued, and now they're seem to be on the back end of the trend of infections. And so India is starting to trend downwards in their infections. Their immunization rates are going up. However, we are still seeing very high levels of fatalities, as much as 4,000 a day. And this could go on for another month or two. And mainly because of that high spike number of infections, there will still people be in ICU, still on ventilators for a prolonged period of time. So we're going to see days and days here of really unfortunate news about how much what the fatality rates will be in India. Here in the United States, we can see that the trend just continues to go down and down and down and down. We're now seeing about 23,000 infections a week now. We haven't had this kind of discussion for almost 12 months, 13 months now, because we are now seeing our rate so low that we're talking about pre-July 4th, even from last year. So it's really interesting how things are changing, and they're changing quite rapidly, not just for us here in the United States, but I think throughout the entire world, things are starting to show a lot of good signs of decline. Brazil remains relatively flat, and what I've noticed, many of the countries in South America have very similar profiles. So they'll have these kind of ebb and flows of infection, decreases, increases, and kind of this plateau that they seem to be just on, and they can't get off this plateau. So Brazil is really a reflection of most of South America. France has taken kind of a dramatic positive turn here with the number of infections that are continually going down. As I mentioned before, two prime examples of countries who've reached that herd immunity level. Obviously, with all the turmoil that's going on in Israel, there's probably the testing ability has probably been interrupted dramatically, of course, and so they're really not reporting any infections at this time. In France, they're down to like 3,200 cases. I'm sorry. In the UK, they're down less than 2,000. And so they've kind of reached this kind of low, steady state of infections that are still occurring. But again, thinking 2,000 infections a day, if that was to occur here in the United States, that wouldn't say would be non-existent, but that would be kind of a rare episode occurring. So what's going on in here in Wisconsin in terms of our vaccination rates? 47.2% of the state has now been vaccinated, 2.7 million doses. I put in here 48,341. So that's the number of children 12 to 15 that have now been vaccinated. And to the left of the state map, we see the number of vaccines administered by race and ethnicity. On the bottom section, it is kind of interesting in terms of numbers and trends, what I noticed. So on the left-hand side, the number of single doses given in the past week. Now, I had mentioned that of the races and ethnicities, there have been a peak. For natives, it was March 17th, with a little over 1,700 individuals vaccinated. And then we see that the other Asian, Black, White, and Hispanic also peaking about a month later. And then everyone started going down. But with the emergency use approval for vaccinating 12 to 15-year-olds, we saw last week that all races, with the exception of the native population, actually showed a bump increase. Well, this week, the number of new vaccines given has actually bumped in all races and ethnicities. And so I just thought that was interesting because we don't hear about this. No one really talks about it, but the numbers are the numbers. And so as a result, the rate of percent change from last week to this week, all races and all ethnicities have actually shown a bump up. So that is actually at least a good indication that the reason why this is because of that 12 to 15 year of age category is bumping up everyone's vaccine rates. The number of fully vaccinated individuals, these are individuals with 2 doses, we're now at 41.3%. And the table below just really shows the rate of fully vaccinated by race. Looking at the total number of doses administered, a little over 5 million. We see the distribution of Moderna and Pfizer far outnumbers Johnson & Johnson. But if we look at the, I think, hold on. If we look at the table, we see May 26th as of yesterday, the average dose. Now I'm changing this to this format just because I wanted to make this a point. So May 26th, the average number of doses is 23,000. That actually is a decline from the week prior. 6-week steady trend of downward average dosing. Now, last week I had mentioned if you had taken out the average number of children being vaccinated, that number actually would have been 21,000. So given the new number of kids, 12 to 15 vaccinated in the past week, minus that average to what is average right now, the 7-day average would actually be 20,000. So the point I'm making is that the kids 12 to 15, the adult vaccination rates are going down. What's helping kind of buoy this up from showing such a market decline is the new vaccines that are being given to the 12 to 15. So this would look a lot worse if it wasn't for that new age group. So I wanted to bring that up. And so I'm going to change it back here. Now, this is the United States. And I think this is going to be kind of the fortuitous of what we're going to be expecting moving forward. So as of May 20th, the 7-day average is now 1.676 million doses per day. And if you look at the bar graph, you can see the trend going down. That bump up is essentially when the FDA authorized the administration of kids 12 to 15. So we saw a bump up as a result of that, but now that those early adopters who are wanting to get vaccines for the 12 to 15, is this a good indication or the first signs that things are going to go back to the rate they were? And now we're going to see a steady decline again. It's quite possible. The bar graphs here to the far right certainly indicate that to be the case. And I think in a couple days, maybe by as early as Saturday, we'll know more what this trend is going to look like. So that plateau is essentially about a week. That slight increase is about a week. And could we have kind of reached our max peak of vaccinating kids 12 to 15? And it's quite possible that's the case. And now we'll see things going back to how they were. Now, what's interesting, what else is going on is Moderna is also looking at approving, getting an approval with the FDA for their vaccine for 12 to 17 years of age. So Pfizer and Moderna could be playing a big role in how the U.S. moves forward. Now, I had mentioned this before about the NIH, CDC talking about, this administration talking about reaching 50% of fully vaccinated people here in the United States. Well, I think when they make those statements, they have to be more absolute and more clarifying when they do it. So when they want to talk about reaching 50%, you got to qualify that as being adults, or individuals 18 and older. 50% of the United States have achieved that. So that's very different than if we're talking in terms of herd immunity, which that definition of the population changes, and the number of vaccinated people, whether it be single dose or fully vaccinated, changes as well. Because when we talk about herd immunity, I mentioned this before, we're talking about the entire population. We're not talking about subsegments. We're not talking about, different age groups. We're talking the entire population. So again, when we talk about fully vaccinated, we're talking about almost 40% of the United States is fully vaccinated. So I talked about this critical threshold point. What's that number that herd immunity and all the experts are talking about? Is about 70%. Well, that's nice, but make sure you clarify that, and that based on the estimations of where we're going right now, we would need about 48, 50 million new individuals to get vaccinated by July 1. And even if that was to occur, we would still only receive or get to 62 to 63% of the entire population being fully vaccinated. Now that's with the current approvals of vaccines right now. What will change and what will determine whether or not we get to that 70% is whether or not the FDA is going to approve Pfizer and Moderna to lower that age group to 6 months and older. Time will tell if that was to happen, whether or not we'll be able to achieve that herd immunity of 70%. Or what could happen is that this virus may peter out and become non-existent before the FDA actually gets to that point of approval. Once we get to that point, then the whole discussion changes again about whether or not children less than the age of 12 should get vaccine if there's no virus transmission going on for a later time. But what's going on here in the United States, we see Florida as being principally the state now with more than 10,000 infections on the average every day. So, and we see all the other states. So just to kind of do a round robin here, we look at Illinois, less than 10,000, Michigan at 5,800, Minnesota, less than 4,000, Wisconsin, you have to go way down to the bottom, 2,600. So you can see that, these are numbers that we haven't really heard of or talked about for almost a little over a year now. So all states, not just Wisconsin, not just the Midwest, but all states are trending down. Even Florida is trending down. Even though they may be the number one state in the country, they are also trending down as well. So everyone is trending downwards, which is a good indication that maybe we are getting closer to the end of the tunnel here and into the light a little bit more. What's going on in Indian country as of May 25th, IHS publishes their numbers, and we can see the aggregated numbers to date of the number of people being tested and the number of positives. Looking at the new infections in the past week, we see that all 12 areas have essentially either gone down or have stayed relatively flat. Overall, there are now 527 new infections being reported in the past week. And again, that trend is going down. So we've had 11 straight weeks of going down with the introduction of the vaccines. We had a bit of a plateau for about 4 weeks that remained relatively flat. And then of the last 3 weeks, we're now in the last 2 weeks definitely back on track, and hopefully that slide will continue into a full trend. What's going on in the more local area of Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin? We see the total number of infections to date. In parentheses is the number of new infections in the past week. And what we see across the board for all 3 states with respect to their the tribal nations is that the trends are going down. The rate of population of infection, Wisconsin is still leads in this at 13%, and I don't foresee Michigan or Minnesota catching up in any way, nor do we want to see that happen. What's going on kind of from a national perspective, I had mentioned 7-day average is about 23,000. About a month ago, it was 56,000. So there's been more than a 60% reduction in the number on the average every day than even a month ago. And that is, to see that kind of drop is really remarkable. In the Bemidji area, that includes Michigan, Wisconsin, and Minnesota, our positivity rate is now 4.4%. If we look at it by state, we see that Michigan 4.9, Minnesota 3.2, here in Wisconsin 2.3%, which is really good, really nice to see. I suspect Michigan and Minnesota are about 2 months behind Wisconsin in getting to this level. So in terms of vaccines being distributed and administered here in the Bemidji area, so the Bemidji area, which includes Wisconsin, of all 12 areas, we're number 5 with respect to the other areas at 78.0% being administered. So this is really good, and we're looking to continue to push and saturate as much as we can of our native population. So that's kind of gives you a quick kind of an idea of not just rates of infection, but also rates of the immunizations and how our area, the Bemidji area, compares to other regions of the country in IHS. So this is just really emphasizing the decrease in trend of vaccines of all races. It's not just one race, it's everyone. There's just not a high demand right now to get that dosing. This is as of May 13th. Essentially, the rates have not changed dramatically over the past week, and currently still remain at a steady state of about in the orange at their current rates. So Wisconsin 7-day average as of yesterday, 307 infections. We haven't seen this since June 22nd. At that time, it was 305. So we're really talking about almost closing in on that 12-month mark here, and from where we are today to where we were 12 months ago. And I suspect this trend is continually going down, not by leaps and bounds, but the trend continues to go down. And I wouldn't doubt at some point here that we'll be talking about less than 200 soon. So this is just a reminder that the rates of infections per 100,000 here in Wisconsin, natives are third in rates of transmission, second in hospitalization rate, and the unfortunate first in fatality rates here in Wisconsin. I know this slide gets really busy, but it's just loaded with a ton of information. So I kind of transitioned with the addition of the 12 to 15-year-old age group, really emphasizing and looking at this age group as it compares to what I've been previously talking about, our elder population. So last week we saw that the rate of infection was probably the highest in the age group of 10 to 19 years of age. They had a low hospitalization rate and 0 admissions and 0 fatalities. Fast forward to now, that gap of infection is almost negligible and pretty much the same between 10 to 19 and our elder population. So it's really about the same, but what is remarkably different is the hospitalization rate is really low for the 10 to 19, as well as no admissions to the ICU and no fatalities. That has not changed. So I know there's been a huge emphasis on assuring, and rightly so, that we have to assure that our elder populations do get vaccinated. And now looking at the age groups, the younger age groups, we see that the rate of infection in these age groups are also starting to go down. It's too early to say whether that's due to the vaccine, because this is what, the second week into, or maybe into the third week of vaccinating children. And that is too early to say whether or not vaccines have made a difference in these rates of infection. It may be just the natural course of how this is slowly diffusing out of our communities and into our public squares. And that may be the case. We won't know for sure until we talk about 2 weeks after second dose for fully vaccinated. So we still have, a good 3 weeks before we can make any real decisions about what, or really good estimates as to how effective vaccines are going to be in the transmission of COVID until probably second week of July, before we really know how effective this has been in rates. So another emphasis at the very bottom, there's a small table of 3 lines. What I did here was look at the K through 12, the K through 12 demographics, as well as the number of cases to date. What does that? 6.8% of all infections in the state of Wisconsin are attributed to K through 12. The number of hospitalizations, as well as a hospitalization rate of less than 1%, ICU rate of 0.03%, and fatality rate of 0.003%, with only 3 deaths out of the 100,000 cases. So again, I just want to bring this up as a point that fatal outcomes are really a rare occurrence for kids K through 12. Even ICU admissions is rare, and as well as hospitalization. So I'll leave it at that, because you can make your own inferences as to how that plays to your family. So Jeremiah, I'm going to turn this back over to you. It's a bit of an abbreviated show, but certainly leave more time for any Q&A.
All right, thank you, Dr. Nace. Just one first question. So, next week, June 1st, the Milwaukee mask mandate will fall off or expire. if a patient or client of the Gerald L. Ignatius Health Center is coming in for care, will they or will they not need to wear a mask?
Right now, we're following the guidance that IHS has provided. We are an IHS facility as an Urban Indian Health Center. They are instructing and requiring that all IHS facilities maintain mask requirements for staff and employees. These are, now if you think this through a bit, we're an indoor facility, a health clinic. We tend to see uh, the chronic care follow-ups that are well and don't have anything, but we also see individuals who also are sick as well. So our risk, and at least in this building, our risk is much higher than what you would see in more of the public spaces. So we are a health facility, and we will maintain mask wearing, and we will require our visitors to also be wearing masks and check-in and screening.
All right, thank you. So you mentioned in your presentation today, the possibility of seeing a spike in cases after the Memorial Day weekend. Mm-hmm. With now the mask mandate kind of falling off right about that same time, do you see, a way to be able to really differentiate the two, or will it just be kind of, I don't know, just mass, I don't want to say chaos, but, the numbers will be just kind of crazy, all over the place?
There's a couple things that are going to be occurring here very shortly. Obviously, we have Memorial Day weekend. Following that, we have school closures, and graduations. And so we're now into the graduation season, family get-togethers, travel is going to be more prominent. I would think, as far as any testament as to how this virus is going, if there is no spike by the third week of June, it could be a very good indication, because of so many gatherings, so much travel that is going on, that the rates of infections are still going down, that this virus may be on its way out. So it's what's going to mess this up a little bit between Memorial Day weekend is the graduation season and the travel. And we really won't know what the impact will be over the next couple of weeks until the third or last week of June, which then leads right into the 4th of July weekend, which may stretch this out even more until we know after that holiday weekend, third week in July, what's really going on.
So we've been seeing a lot of, you mentioned, people that were excited about the vaccine have gotten it, and then now it's just kind of been this slow crawl to get others involved. And obviously healthcare facilities are still doing their part, but it seems lately there's been a lot of incentivized, I guess, vaccine promotions. And I just saw something today, the Brewers were giving out free tickets. I think they said something about, maybe they did 100 or so, dozens, I think they said, so breweries are doing things. Obviously that's not gonna, give a huge spike in your graph that you showed, but, is that kind of slow enough or slow crawl enough to, maybe not get us to 70% by July, 4th of July, but, maybe later in the summer?
It'd be kind of interesting to see how this all plays out, because we hear about other states even incentivizing, some kind of lottery, entering the lottery system by getting vaccinated now. So it's just going to be, I don't know if people are going to bite, if they're going to bite on getting vaccines based on whether or not they get a pair of Brewers tickets or, a free beer or something like that. Yeah, that'll happen. I don't see it as being, I don't see it being as the most intriguing of incentives. If people are so hard fast against it or so much on the fence that they don't want to get off, that I don't know what will. I don't know what will. I don't think going to a Brewers game is going to be enough for people who aren't sports enthusiasts, and um, what's probably going to put us over the top isn't so much adults. It is going to be that younger generation. Because remember, and let me bring this up, because this slide right here. So when we look at this right upper quadrant area where it says 47.2%, as that bar starts going from light orange to brighter orange, and then it stops, well, that stop is essentially 20, and the gray part is 20% of the state. That 20% of the state represents 16 years of age and younger. So that is what's going to put us over the top if we're going to get to that 70%, is going to be that younger age group. Now, that is all going to be dependent on families, because vaccines are parent guardian approvals. And so that's going to be an interesting discussion moving forward and going into the next school year. And you're going to see a lot of angry people if schools start mandating their kids' return is predicated on getting a vaccine. You're going to have a lot of debate on that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that other stories out there too flying around, that it seems as though there's a lot of employers that necessarily aren't mandating the vaccine, but they're kind of holding over the idea of, well, you're still gonna have to wear your mask, you're still gonna have to abide by protocols, COVID related, that you had to deal with this whole year. If you want to, take the mask off and kind of go about your way as you were prior to COVID, you have to get a vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that that's I'd say almost bordering on,
yep.
Mandating from an employer. Could we see more of that, in the next couple of months if we do see a major slowdown?
Yeah, I do see that as it's going to come to the forefront pretty soon, because it's just starting to do that. And there are people being fired for not being, and it's going to become an issue again as well. So just like going back to school, coming back to work, verifying vaccines, who's been vaccinated, who's not. These are all going to become real issues moving forward. And unfortunately, it's probably going to get ugly and probably lead to lawsuits.
I did want to bring up a positive quote. It was again about the Brewers free tickets, but there was someone who was interviewed that got the vaccine, and because I think they were giving out J&J and I can't remember the other one, but apparently she went specifically to get the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So that to me was kind of, maybe a bright spot considering what J&J had kind of gone through over the past couple months.
No, some people will be moved by incentives. People are moved by, sales on clothes, reducing prices, this one may be a harder one to sell, and it won't be for a lack of trying, because like I said, some states are holding $1 million lotteries for people who are late arrivers to getting vaccinated. So, people need to be moved in incentive ways, and I really just hope we don't get to having to pay people literally cash in hand to get vaccinated. I hope that doesn't have to lead to that. Because I would say, where's my money?
Yeah. Well, I guess it's not quite there, but it's almost. Last thing before we go, I wanted to ask you about, there was some I think Novavax seems like it's kind of ramping up or getting close to finishing its trials, and maybe it would be another one on the docket. But what jumped out to me is that being, I guess I want to say, done or created in the old manner, I guess, of more along the lines of the J&J. You'll be able to voice it better than me. But just curious on your thoughts on the possibility of that coming into fruition, in the near future.
You mean the other platforms being introduced?
Yeah, just the way, obviously the Pfizer and Moderna are the mRNA as far as production, and then the J&J and I believe the AstraZeneca were the kind of, I believe you called it like the kind of old way of doing things, but.
Yeah. And so you're talking about the platforms by which these biotech companies are creating their vaccine, the technology that they use. And it's not to say that the prior platforms aren't proven and true. They work. We know they work. We have a history of our own public vaccine campaigns that have been very clearly showing evidence that they work. Polio, MMR, so these are tried and true, proven platform technologies for vaccines, from not only to this very day, but also just from a historical standpoint. What will change in the future will really be probably two things. I think the way we, science and these biotech companies, look at how we create the flu vaccine may change. This mRNA technology has been shown to be quite effective. And could the old way of creating the vaccine be converted to the new way of the mRNA in real time? And that would be a game changer, I would think. And I wouldn't doubt if not these biotech companies, other newer, newer to the game of vaccines are going to use the mRNA to look at other viruses, particularly the flu, and how the flu vaccine is created. But using this technology moving forward, there's all kinds of new talk about intermixing flu vaccine with the coronavirus vaccine. There's the Pneumovax, the old Pneumovax shot, which is against bacteria, but also introducing a booster along with the coronavirus too. So that's a little weird, only because we're talking about bacteria and virus are two different types of ways that people can get infected. But that's the level of new wave thinking of how we move forward on vaccines. And so, I think mRNA is the wave of the future. It's just what areas do they want to get involved in creating vaccines for very specific either boosters or preventative things, and particularly the flu, and obviously looking at boosters in the future for coronavirus.
All right, thank you. So I guess get to the end of our show here, and I'll as always leave you with the last word. We're heading into our Memorial Day weekend, 3-day, 4-day, 5-day weekends for people. Just leave us with some suggestions, some ways to go about our daily, whatever we're doing with family, friends, outside, inside, just to help us kind of continue to stay safe and kind of ride this thing out.
Yeah, I'll still put an emphasis on getting vaccines, and I think this weekend would be probably even a truer look at how vaccines have impacted us overall. We have people who've been vaccinated have a much greater sense of protection, and obviously that comes with more, what I call liberties, freedom, so to speak, as to what you can, where you can, and how people engage in just socializing. Going into this weekend, there's going to be all kinds of family get-togethers, cookouts, barbecues. People are thinking about vacation and getting away, and it just becomes easier. It's an easier proposition to think of of of, of being vaccinated and being able to kind of more freely go about pre-pandemic activities. It just becomes so much easier and such a bigger relief as a result of that. I wanted to bring up one other point. We've been getting a lot of questions, actually two kinds of questions right now. One is about boosters. I'm trying to gather information to talk about what that is and what that may look like. But right now, there has not been any formal information out there leading to an indication that boosters are coming. At right now, I'd say maybe it's 40-60, 50-50 maybe. Boosters are coming, but that has yet to be determined right now. So that's one. The other thing is I'm getting a fair amount of inquiries about supporting another vaccine campaign event, and particularly looking at children 12 to 15 and looking at how this impacts and how to get people fully vaccinated before the upcoming school year. And so I've been engaged in several organizations to talk about what can be done. And a decision is going to be made fairly soon about not only if we're going to do one, but as to when and where. So please stay tuned for that, because that's a hot topic for me to try to determine the most appropriate and effective way into delivering that effort. But this weekend, family events, graduations are coming, 4th of July, summertime's here, school kids are going to be out of school. Being fully vaccinated, as I continue to say, certainly allows people to have more liberties in being able to socialize and engage. The more you want to feel like we are back to pre-pandemic activities. This is probably a really good time to think about getting that vaccine if you're on the fence. So until next time, everyone, stay strong and get your vaccine. So take care, everybody. Thank you.